Earlier this week, I was so pleased. I was so happy. I even tweeted. I tweeted that all of my causes won the day before in the elections. Now, up in Wisconsin, we had the Milwaukee County Executive. The right guy won. A rebuke of the governor up there. In the Supreme Court race up in Wisconsin, the right woman won. A rebuke of the governor up there. In Chicago, here, my alderman, gay guy, won. How sweet. On top of all of this, Glenn Beck gets fired from Fox News Channel. How sweet it was. It ain't anymore. Welcome back to Rob's Feed Today. This is episode number 112, and I'm Rob Shendel. Maybe you're a college student living in a dorm. Maybe you just live in a small studio apartment. What you need to do is get over to dormco.com/Rob. Once you're there, you'll find all kinds of items specifically designed for folks living in small spaces. That's dormco.com/Rob. One of the things that I really like is when I watch the news, or I read a Twitter feed, or I look at a Facebook posting, and I think, boy, that sounds familiar. Wait a minute. I reported on that 2 episodes ago on Rob's Feed Today. You know that happens a lot. And to that end, I like to keep this podcast timely. In the last week, I have recorded 3 10 to 15-minute episodes that have ended up in the dumpster because the news is changing just that fast. And unfortunately, well, here's the problem with that, though, because this is not a streaming video. This is a podcast. Pod, P-O-D, personal on demand. That means you can watch it at your leisure. Ideal, right? Except that I'll be sitting here talking about something, and it can be totally different by the time you get to watch this. So, regardless, 3 times this week, I had stuff ready in the can to share with you, and boom, the news changed, and it changed so abruptly that I would have looked like an idiot. Not that I don't look like an idiot sometimes anyway. Last week was the last week of March, and I celebrated my birthday. I was out of town. I was with my family. I celebrated with all my siblings, and spent a couple nights with my sister. And I had generally a very nice time. It was podcast free. So I wasn't near the cameras. I didn't even listen or watch to anybody else's podcast. So, well, I really hadn't intended it to be that way. That's the way it ended up. But the topic among all my relatives and everybody up in Wisconsin was the upcoming general elections. And that would have been Tuesday. As I speak now, that was 3 days ago. Now, we had a ballot here in Chicago for alderman. We had a great guy, a gay guy in my ward who was running for it, James Kappelman, and I might say right just off the bat, congratulations, Jim, you won. Although I think you know that. And but the big thing was up there in Wisconsin, where collective bargaining has been an issue because of legislation the governor and the Republican legislatures up there had enacted forbidding collective bargaining when it comes to public employees. A real assault on the unions up there in the state of Wisconsin. So we had a few choices there to rebuke that. As you probably know, the good people of Wisconsin have been massively protesting this, and well, we had in the county of Milwaukee, we had the county executive race. We had a Governor Walker clone running against a young man, and well, the good guy won. Right there was something to celebrate because it was a definite rebuke from the electorate of the governor's policies. Then we had the Supreme Court race, and this was the one that was really important because this particular position on the Wisconsin Supreme Court sways it from being a conservative court to a progressive court. And this is the court that will definitely have to decide what happens when it comes to this collective bargaining assault. And by 204 votes, Joanne Kloppenberg beat David Prosser, and at least that was the announced tally, and we were so happy. I tweeted that, what I told you I just tweeted. And then, so those three things, and then Glenn Beck got fired, and that was so how great that was. Until last night. Got to keep in mind how important this is to the middle class. You know, it's I said it's the public employees unions that are being banned, but that's a real assault on the middle class, on the working people everywhere. It's through the efforts of the unions over the last century or so that we have an 8-hour work day, we have the holidays, and we have the weekends off. We don't have child labor. We have equal pay, and quite frankly, any equality, workplace equality for LGBT people, you gotta again hand it to the unions, because that's how, through the collective bargaining of the workers, how it all came to pass in the first place. But then last night, west of Milwaukee, the county of Waukesha, it's quite a Republican place. Of course, it's a place that I always kind of felt a little fond of, because as a child, we used to go to Waukesha County and swim in Silver Lake, right out there, if you're acquainted with the area. But a lot of fond memories of Silver Lake. Well, wouldn't you know it, the county clerk, a real questionable figure in her own right, has, well, first off, she's been indicted before for malfeasance and partisanship where it's not allowed, and now she's county clerk, and she won't modernize the system in that county clerk's office. So ultimately, and this is the truth, on her personal computer, she mysteriously finds, actually she found like some 11,000 votes. That's just really cool, right? So some 3,000 more votes for Joanne Kloppenberg, the good guy in this race, and so many more for David Prosser. So ultimately, the bad guy wins by 7,500 votes, 7,500 votes. A very interesting figure. You see, in Wisconsin, if the difference between the winner and loser is an amount that's less than 0.5%, the state will trigger and pay for an automatic recount. This just pushes it over the 0.5% mark. So if there's going to be a recount, the candidate who requests the recount has to come up with millions of dollars to pay for it. That's why that amount of 7,500 votes is so important. And how they mysteriously happen to find just the right amount is unbelievable. And it's fraud. How can you explain it? I was just watching some of the tallies coming through, because the vote is being certified now for us throughout the state. And another Republican county just to the north of Milwaukee, just to the west, this Ozaukee County is to the north of Milwaukee County. And that's, I think probably even more Republican. But they found more votes too. They found one more vote for Joanne Kloppenberg and one more vote for David Prosser. Well, all right, that makes sense. They each got what? So the net result is nil, but that will happen. Not 7,500 votes. So Republican dirty tricks are alive and well, and now they've moved to Waukesha County in Wisconsin. So it's been an incredible roller coaster for most of us in progressive politics, but what can I say? I also want to tell you about the fact that after I voted here in Chicago on Tuesday, I decided that I would go to an event that occurred. Now, you probably aren't like I do. You probably don't listen to progressive talk radio as much as I do. But here, at least locally and across the country, In the early evening, there's a gentleman on the radio whose name is Norman Goldman, and he's here in Chicago this week instead of in his Los Angeles studios, and he did a remote in the neighborhood next to mine, up in Rogers Park, at a place called Main Stage. And after I've voted, I realized, well, I could go do a podcast, or I could go and see Norman Goldman, get to meet him. I've had some correspondence with him once in a while. He's mentioned me on the air, but I had never met him. So I did indeed. I went up to the theater, and I had a nice time. There were like 251 people there. And then I did get to meet him, and I did chat with him a little bit. I had tweeted, while sitting there on my little phone, I tweeted that where I was and who I was with. Now, Mr. Goldman's running around the audience with a microphone in hand playing Phil Donahue, and my phone alerts me, you've been hearing the phone alert me in the background about some other things too, but that Norman Goldman is now following your tweets. And I'm thinking to myself, how the hell he's running around with a microphone talking to people, he's not at the computer following me? Well, he does have someone else who monitors, so he told me anyway, he does have someone else who has access to his Twitter feed and will keep it updated for situations just like this. The next day, we were all celebrating the 204 vote victory that Ms. Kloppenberg had over the incumbent David Prosser in the Supreme Court race up in Wisconsin. And I sent him an email that basically said, Norm, put this in perspective, how every vote counts. And I've hammered this into you over and over again right here on this podcast, but how does every vote count? 204 votes separated the winner from the loser at that time, and we had 251 people in the audience at your event the night before. And he read it on the air and talked about, he referred to me, but person that I was absolutely right, and then went into the spiel again some more. But I felt it was so cool that I was talked about and quoted on national radio, and so that was another great moment in my life. All have come crashing down the next night when the news of this voter fraud came out. For me, it's kind of difficult with this podcast because it is a gay podcast, but yet so many issues so impact our lives that aren't officially gay issues. So, I beg your indulgence, and I'm sorry if this bores you, and particularly if you don't happen to live in Wisconsin or Illinois. This might be a little off your radar screen, but it's important, and I appreciate that you took the time to listen. Now, I did want to update you with the never-ending, so it seems, project that I'm in that involves this podcast in the studio that I'm trying to build piecemeal, one little item at a time. Actually, it won't be a new podcast studio. All it's going to be is to shift all this to a different corner of the room, and thereby being able to have different backdrops and all kinds of stuff. I need a monitor, and as all I have to do now is go to another page on this computer and click pay, and it'll be on its way. So I'm quite happy with that. I'll have the monitor I need, and at least a little bit closer to get. And this is something I've talked to you guys for months about, and I'm happy. It's another big step towards my ultimate goal on this podcast studio. Once again, I'd like to thank you for downloading and thank you for watching. We'll be back very shortly with another episode, but for now, I think that's all I'm going to say.